Do you like books? I mean, really, really like books? Then you're in the right place. Each week, your host, Sam Hankin, interviews the best of today's top-selling authors and the up-and-coming superstars of modern literature. This is The Avid Reader. Here is your host, Sam Hankin.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of The Avid Reader, brought to you by Wellington Square Bookshop. Our guest today is A.M. Homes, author of The Unfolding, published by Viking and released on September 6th. Ms. Holmes' previous works include The End of Alice, Music for Torching, Days of Awe, The Mistress's Daughter, This Book Will Save Your Life, Jack, and many others. Her work has appeared in Granta, New York Times, and New Yorker, lots of other publications. So, The Unfolding is just that, a letter creased vertically and horizontally. You open it, there it is, a beginning and an end. You reveal, you disclose thoughts, information. The year is 2008, which should be good enough for many of us, in my opinion, the good ones, to remember that year as a beginning. But for others, it was an end to an era that they held close, that they fit into like a glove. And at first, and a lot of reviews go back and forth on this, at first one might think that this novel is not prescient. You know, it's set, 14 years ago. Let me remind you of something. Let me read you something real quick. This is from Obama's remarks on election night. I just received a very gracious call from Senator McCain. He fought long and hard in this campaign, and he's fought even longer and harder for the country he loves. He has endured sacrifices for America that most of us cannot begin to imagine, and we are better off for the service rendered by this brave and selfless leader. Now think about what Donald Trump said about him. He said, I like people who weren't captured. Or, as he actually said 4 days ago, the FBI and DOJ are vicious monsters. Is that even possible? So since 2015, I've been saying you can't make this stuff up. Well, AM can, because she's a fiction writer. But it's tough for a fiction writer today because it honestly is almost impossible to make this stuff up. So let's see what we can find out about all this by looking into the mind, heart, and soul of a man just called the big guy. So welcome, AM. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So as a bookseller, you know, can't judge a book by its cover, but every single person who comes in judges a book by its cover. And this is a great one. Oh, can you hold it up? Come on.
Yes, I can.
So you want to describe it and how it came about? Did you vet it? Did you come up with it?
I did vet it. I had a long chat with my publisher at Viking, an editor, and we talked about everything from how right now people need a cover that's very simple, that can also be spotted as a thumbnail. And I wanted a cover that was representative of American tradition in some way. So red, white, and blue. I wanted an echo of the flag, but I didn't want the flag itself. And I wanted to indicate that something was wrong. I didn't mention eating cake, but I do quite like cake. Yeah, and I think they did a great job, actually. Yeah. And then if you want, because you're a bookseller, I'll show you something very cool.
Okay.
This is the British cover that is also just out.
It's so weird.
Yeah. And so that's George Washington. And actually, this is the what do you call it? I believe this is the galley. The actual cover has more items, but this is the hot air balloon in Palm Springs. That's target practice. There's all sort of different things that are in the book that are represented on the cover, looking a little bit like an old-fashioned colonial quilt.
So the British version has more Easter eggs than the American version.
Yes, it does.
So yeah, as a bookseller, red's great. It's short title, which I always think is great. No subtitle, which I hate. And yeah, it's really good. And the other thing as a bookseller that a lot of people don't think about are the epigraphs. The reason why I like them is because I think that the author must have thought long and hard about them. And it's funny because your epigraphs, which seems almost contrary to the book itself, are not pessimistic. They're optimistic. You know, Thomas Wolfe is talking about hope, and George Orwell is talking about understanding. And I wonder how you came up with those given the content of the book.
I guess I think I have to look at the epigraphs to see exactly what I ended up picking. But I think for me, the Orwell was super interesting because Orwell, this is a line from Orwell, perhaps one did not want to be loved so much as to be understood. And so for me, that was a combination of things about a representation of the big guy, and the desire to understand him, but also that I feel like we are at a moment where in bookstores and book selling, people keep saying to me, oh, am I supposed to like these characters? And I think that's irrelevant. I want you to have some sense of understanding and understanding of the other. And right now, a lot of what we're delivered news-wise, in terms of what people read, they're looking for their own reflection. People read in their own little category. For me, reading was always about getting beyond myself, getting beyond the known and into someone else's experience, someone else's skin. And so that was important to me.
That's what a good book is all about. It makes
Yeah,
you, after you close the cover, you're still thinking about it.
absolutely. So that
Um,
was that. And I am optimistic despite everything.
Yeah, it's like the Thomas Wolfe one is like, you know what? We could come full circle. This may be we may not be around, but you know, America's still an experiment and we have the longest constitution. We've had a pretty good run.
Yeah.
But okay, sorry. I got that. So let's start. Oh, so when I was listening to the thing on politics and prose,
Yeah.
the moment you said it, I turned to my bar, Highland Park.
Oh, nice. Very nice.
I know. So do you like single malt scotches or did you just give them to
Oh. I don't really drink. I'm the only person I know sort of in our age group that every year I'm like, you got to watch more TV and drink more. And I keep trying to drink and I really can't drink. I don't know. It's like I take it as a personal failure. And people will say to me, are you an alcoholic? And I'm like, no, I will try for you, but it won't go well. So yeah.
Yeah,
But
well,
no,
so you're
yeah.
like the doctor. You're not a doctor, but you play one on TV, which is
I totally do play a doctor. Yes, I really do. And that's a whole other department, but yes, I do.
Okay, well, let's go back. Let's start with the big guy at the bar. And why is he all mopey?
Why is he on Opie? Well, I think the big guy has had sort of a rude awakening, which is that in his mind, the Republican Party is not working the way it should. And he can date that back to before 2008 when Al Gore and George Bush were in a contest and it looked like Al Gore won. And the only reason I think that George Bush ultimately, when I woke up, was president and still Al Gore instead of Al Gore was due to hanging Chad in the state of Florida, who's not a person for those who don't remember, but is a concept of a little ditzel on a voting piece of paper. The Republican Party had control of Florida at that time and was able to sort of assert themselves. And so, took control of that election and they had their president. The big guy says this time when McCain loses that they can't do that. They don't have a trick up their sleeve. And he is worried that they are losing grip on the America of his forefathers, of his history, the America that he loves so dearly. He does live in a bubble and he doesn't seem to realize that there is another America out there and an America that some people are thrilled that Obama has won and see it as an incredible opportunity and a chance to do things that had not been possible before, in part because there is a Black president and for young people to see that and really that there's a celebration happening while he and his friends are in the bar moping.
Geez, I'm thinking of his friends. And another thing I always think about, like with Ayn Rand, Ellsworth Toohey, Dagny Taggart, Howard Roark, 60 years after I read it, I still remember the names. And like with you, there's this cast of goofy ass characters. There's Bo, there's Tony, there's Dr. Is it?
Freud.
I know he's Freud, yeah, because he's Scandinavian.
Right, exactly.
And there's Kissick, who I really like because he's such a sad sack. And the judge, Metzger, Eisner, and of course Charlotte and Meghan. So look, I know them all. I know them.
That's great.
So where the hell did you come up with? Well, especially the guys. Where did you come up with them? Especially, the idea of wet cigars.
Sure. I came up with them in part by looking at actually Eisenhower's continuity of government plan. So Eisenhower tapped 10 men secretly who were in mostly civilians. One guy was running a TV network. other people in other areas of business or commerce, and said, in the event of nuclear disaster, you will be in charge of this part of American culture, society, banking. And he sent them each a letter, which is so funny now, because if you got a letter that said, I'm in charge of agriculture. So say there's a nuclear war and now I'm in charge of agriculture. Do I go up to a farmer and say, see here, President Eisenhower made me, the leader of this? But I wanted to create a group of men that represented different areas. So banking, Kizik, Metzger is advertising, which to me was very important. The healthcare is the doctor, the judge is the legal side. And I was really trying to have them in part be a kind of a Greek chorus, but also a cohort that kind of spins each other up. And that piece of the book is meant to be slightly pushed out towards the more satirical and the more sort of Dr. Strange-lovey, while the other sort of braid of the book is a more sort of intimate, domestic, I would say realistic narrative, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and I want to talk about Meghan and Charlotte
Sure.
and all that. But when you talk about Eisenhower's 10, you have all the, some people call this a roman à clef, but they're wrong, because a roman à clef, they'd have different names, not their real names. So you have Dick Cheney, you have Condoleezza Rice, you have Haldeman, you have the George Bush, you have the Fords, you have all these people in there. So it's like, okay. And then I was thinking, is it really a roman à clef that these guys are somebody else? But then I realized if they really were, you would be dead now.
Meaning if they were real?
Yeah.
I would be dead now? Well, I could be dead soon. I think they are real in a sense. I think that they are representative of, a group of men who have enormous resources financially and power, and have been exerting that power on American politics with increasing investment, I would call it, since earlier than 2008. But if you look at even just the amounts of money poured in 2008, $100,000 got you a lot of influence. Now that's $100 million. And that's a very exponential period of, I don't want to call it growth because it's not growth, but of money needing to be bigger, bigger, and bigger to buy influence or to buy access.
Yeah, there's this guy, Leonard Leo, who I think
Exactly.
a billion.
Yeah, the other day he dropped like more than $1 billion, like 1.8 billion. Exactly.
We're screwed.
Well, exactly. Sorry. That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, it's not exponential, it's arithmetic. People like to say logarithmic, but it's not, it's arithmetic. But anyway, the other thing is, before we go to real stuff, is I didn't expect this book to make me hungry.
Sorry.
And there's so much food and drink: steak and potatoes, green
Yeah.
smoothies, hot cocoa, vodka, single malt scotch, steak Diane. Where did you come up? I mean, it really did make me hungry.
Yeah, steak Diane is on the menu at Melvin's in Palm Springs. So again, I will say that almost always, I mean, I very much, I love research, I love history, I love detail. So that's there. And all the candy, the Chicago-based candy is real. Metzger's, things that he's creating, his own confections are real. People have noticed in the past that there is a lot of food in my writing. I don't know what to say. I think it's one of the ways of talking about culture, family, history. Even in fact, talking about there's a dinner in Georgetown where Condoleezza Rice is, and they're talking about terrapin soup, which I mean, I've never had, would never want to have, but that is a Maryland historical delicacy. The Maryland football team is the Terrapins at the University of Maryland. So that'd be turtles to the rest of us.
When he's doing the menu with Mary, I'm thinking,
Yes.
oh, he's an old white man. And I go, oh, I'm an old white man too. I like steak and potatoes. This is what I would put on the menu as well. But it's interesting the way he carefully does that. And also, okay, let's get to Charlotte. How careful he is with her and tries to make her, what did he make her? Eggs?
He made her an egg. Yeah.
Yeah. And talk about Charlotte, because she's so important, but once again, it's a different time. The time is actually before 2008, the way he acts towards his wife.
Yes, absolutely. So, and they are not young in 2008. They are definitely in a way of a different generation, sort of in some senses. Charlotte to me is like almost what Tom Wolfe would have called a social X-ray. So she is the kind of woman who's somewhere between Joan Didion and Nancy Reagan, but who never eats. And is very obsessed by that. And it's almost as though it wouldn't even be possible for her to eat. So her relationship to food is different than other people. But importantly, Charlotte too is someone who is, I would say, quite pained, quite fragile, and at the same time, very sturdy. She also grew up in a time when women weren't asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? They were asked, what kind of man do you want to marry? So Charlotte has lived this life. And I also paralleled her in my mind a little bit to Martha Mitchell, who was John Mitchell's wife, of course, during the Watergate era, who was an alcoholic, who knew a lot and famously tried to tell reporters what she knew and was literally silenced by Nixon's group. And also, Betty Ford, who also had an alcohol problem and actually founded the Betty Ford Center, where Charlotte goes. And then it's so like the big guy, because he has to talk about how they were friends with Jerry and Betty. It's just interesting. And I thought it was important too to talk about the ways in which things like addiction and alcoholism aren't unique to people with or without money. It crosses all economic boundaries.
Well, before we talked, I showed you my library of you, and it's so like you, the way he calls the Betty Ford Clinic, and he can't get through, and he says he knew they're my friends, and you have to have the special person on. How did you, that whole scene was so hilarious, but then so poignant as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also the thing where on the one hand, there's this guy who isn't used to even doing a lot of things for himself. And he's trying to get through on a holiday to his wife, in the dry out clinic, and they won't let him. And that's like so against the grain of everything he's known. And he's like, but you don't know who I am. And they're like, we don't care who you are. And for me, the fun of writing that too, is there's a moment where he spoke to somebody, and who did he speak to? Shirley Jackson, which of course is the writer Shirley Jackson, who's, just dropped in there. But that's the beauty of what I get to do, is I get to have fun with things like that.
But Meghan referred to a Shirley Jack. What did she? Oh, the lottery. She referred to the lottery before that.
Yes. So there's a very good reading there. The scene where Meghan votes for the first time, I really wanted to create it as an echo of the lottery, and that sense of there's something happening, there's something menacing. And people are saying, people are going to come along before too soon, and people are going to want to say what they think and all these things. And that was absolutely meant as an echo of the lottery. Yeah. And Meghan mentions it.
Oh, so Meghan. Oh, well, that's the other thing is, people are going to maybe they'll get confused. And then when I ran the numbers, I'm not so confused. No spoilers, so I can't say. But so if he's like, one of the reviews says he's in his mid 60s, but I don't know if he's in his mid 60s, but she's 18. So describe describe why that is.
Why she's 18 and he's old?
Yeah, well, I mean,
I can't. That would cause me to maybe have to give away a piece of information. But I would say that when Meghan was born, her parents were slightly older than the average parent.
Like 45, 43, something like that.
Something like that, yeah. Which isn't really that old.
No, not now.
Parents, yeah, exactly. Saul Bellow had a kid in his 80s.
So did Tony Randall.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, so Meghan.
You don't see women doing that, do you?
No, I think 59
I know,
is the latest natural birth.
Right,
But
exactly.
the thing about Meghan is, at times she almost seems like a child because she's so naive about so many things. And then you think she's going to be, again, without giving anything away, you think she's going to be speechless at some things, and yet she just moves on. And how did you create her? Because you do have this admixture of an adult, well, on the cusp, and he keeps calling him a girl. He keeps calling her a girl, not a woman. And she's a woman.
Right. Well, I would say that is the very definition too of being 18, which is that you are big and small. So in many ways, Meghan has had a life that is, I would say, quite sheltered and quite sort of specific in that she has, gone sort of through the phases of that are normal, but she's also done it in a way that's very kind of privileged, honestly, and allowed her to maintain that naivete. And I would say her family has probably gone to some lengths to preserve that, right? They don't really want her to know too much about the world, and she's very protective. That said, I think she has been exposed to quite a number of people in different situations and so on, and does know more than she realizes she knows about everything. And then when she's witness to McCain losing that night, she begins to notice that what she took to be maybe a group of her parents' friends or supporters really might be a smaller section of the American people than she had previously known. And she begins to sort of ask questions and realize that there is a world out there that is larger and more complicated. And there's also a scene that involves her and her horse, which is really much about realizing that sometimes the systems and people that we think are supposed to keep us safe don't keep us safe. And so questioning the idea of the way in which we invest in sort of protecting ourselves and what is real and what we have to discover for ourselves.
Yeah, and this idea of prescience, maybe inadvertently or not, that scene in the woods.
Yeah.
At first you go, well, this couldn't happen. And then you go, oh yeah, it could. It happens every day, right?
Absolutely. Yes.
Oh, it's so weird because it just kind of hit me, going, well, what? No. And then I go, oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing, being a good reader, is that the distillation of her girl versus womanhood is when she's talking about her shoes at the party.
With Condoleezza Rice, I think. Exactly.
Yeah, she didn't recognize.
Yes, right. She doesn't recognize Condoleezza Rice. Yeah. And the idea, and Condoleezza Rice is like, she needs a shoe that looks a certain way, but she also has to be able to move quickly in it. Yeah. And it's sort of, I find that both entertaining, and it bums me out that women have to sort of think about their shoes and what the connotations of their footwear are in terms of adult versus child and feminine versus useful.
Are you in New York now?
I am, yes.
Yeah, it's like women in New York going to work and having to do that thing with the flats and then put them in your purse and then put your heels on. It's like, what the hell are you guys doing? Why are you still putting up with that?
Exactly. But yes. Yeah.
The other thing,
I'm barefoot at the moment, so
I was going to have my slippers on, but I decided.
I know.
Were you at Politics and Prose?
No, I was not barefoot in the bookstore. Exactly.
Barefoot in the Bookstore is a good title.
It is. That's actually good. It is. It's a good podcast, right? Barefoot in a Bookstore.
Yeah, you could definitely do episodes. Everything is episodes now, There's no one thing.
Life is episodes.
I guess. Well, that goes to one of the things I really thought about, which was, how Nathaniel Branden, going back to Ayn Rand, in the middle of the book, they'd stick some screed in that he had and then you'd skip it because it was really boring. The thing about your dialogue is people do the same kind of thing, but you're reading it because it's interesting. So some of the dialogue is lengthier than you would expect in a novel, but it doesn't bog down the novel in the slightest, like when Tony's talking. And that was impressive, tough to do.
It's interesting because my editor in England called and said, there's a lot of dialogue in this book. And I just was like, really? I hadn't noticed. And that's true. I think in some ways, I really always want to give the characters the time and space to sort of be themselves. And with these guys, there's also this sort of jockeying for position and sort of they're pontificating, they spin each other up, they're a little bit competitive. And so I wanted them to be able to just do their thing, which was very kind of rat-a-tat-tat sort of dialogue. Tony to me is a super interesting character. So Tony is the big guy's best friend since college. He's gay, he's closeted. And he, for me, reminds me, so I grew up in Washington, D.C., I guess I was born in the 60s and grew up in the 70s and 80s. And I remember there being a kind of guy like Tony, who in theory didn't seem to have a personal or private life, was always available for work, was often at the side of a man in power, not as their boyfriend, but as their sort of helper and their attaché. And in part was molded on people like Lem Billings, who was JFK's sort of best friend, and the columnist Joseph Alsop. And I was just so aware that there was this other world, and I had never seen it articulated. And then literally like 2 months ago or 3 months ago, a book came out by a guy named James Kirchick about the secret city of gay Washington. And I remember too, as I was a sort of late teenager, that's when AIDS happened. And not only did a whole bunch of these guys die, they were disowned by their families. Their parents didn't come to see them when they were dying. And it really, I think, changed the landscape. And for the character of Tony, I also think it changed him. And in that way, Tony is sort of playing a much longer game about what he hopes to kind of gain from the political system and from being a part of, Washington, bureaucracy. I think Tony is a kind of a sort of a fixer in a certain way.
Yeah, and you talked earlier about whether people ask you whether you're supposed to like these characters or not. This is why this book is perfect for a book club, which I call Fight Club, because the people sitting on either side, he isn't good, he's an asshole, whatever. But the thing about Tony is, well, a lot of them, you like the big guy too, you like Bo. But Tony is, the one thing you didn't mention about Tony is that he can slide through administrations.
Yes.
And that's because he doesn't really have a bone to pick.
Yeah.
But he joins this cadre. Why? Why does he do that?
I think for Tony, it's better to be on the inside and see and know everything than to be on the outside. And he is, because of his identity and so on, he is perpetually both an outsider and yet also the consummate insider.
Yeah.
And also, I would say growing up in Washington, it's interesting because right around the time of the Nixon administration, when I was a little kid, every 4 years, you just got new classmates. They'd be like, hi, we're moving in, and the other people moving out. And then right around the time of Nixon, Washington and sort of the bureaucratic world just grew. People didn't want to leave. And it was the rise of the think tank, and it was the rise of the institute. And so all of these people, the receivers now of dark money, just left the official government role and stepped into a private role. And so that's also part of what's playing into what we're seeing right now is, there's a lot of people who are working in that city. There's a lot of money dumped into information broadcasting, or maybe I should call it narrative. I don't even think it's information. I think it's narrative.
Well, it's like you were saying last night, when you're talking about alternative facts,
Yes.
you're actually presenting alternative facts, but you can do it.
But weirdly, my alternative facts are closer to actual facts than the alternative. I mean, that's the thing that's so scary, is what I thought was fiction is showing itself to be entirely true.
Well, yeah, the reason why it's a cliche, truth is stranger than fiction, is because it really is, especially right now.
Yeah.
But the other thing you do is, when you mention these real people, you say what I think about Dick Cheney. He's the crystallization of evil, something like Stephen King has in a couple of his novels with this tiny little crystal of evil. And I know you've worked with him. Yeah, and then you really captured George Bush because he's so goofy in the White House and the carpet and the M&Ms. The M&Ms.
The M&Ms are real. Those are the real M&Ms. Reagan gave out jelly beans. And the thing was, the reason Reagan started giving out jelly beans is they used to give out cigarettes on Air Force One, right? It was like, here's your pack of Air Force One cigarettes. And then they were like, there's no more smoking on the airplane. And so Ron Reagan was like, I need to give out jelly beans. And then after Reagan, they're like, kind of like, we don't really want to give out jelly beans anymore. So it became the signature M&Ms. And now it's just the box, the signature on the box changes with each president.
Oh, it's always M&Ms?
Yes, it's always M&Ms. Isn't that funny?
Yeah, it's like turtles all the way down.
Totally. Terrapins.
Terrapins,
That was the original title. And then John Green felt the need to change it. And I said, John, you're wrong. People love terrapins.
Yeah, well, that was interesting too. The cutlery and the dishes and the bowls, the way they almost had personalities of their own. You do a lot of that in your books of inanimate things, kind of like Nabokov. Transparent things. It's kind of like, this is here and it's been here and it will be here, notwithstanding what happens.
Right. Yeah. That is interesting. I'm taking that as an enormous compliment. But yes, I am very aware of the presence of objects and the way objects stay. And also, I wrote an opera about this sort of earlier this year, but the way that objects and places, they call it stone memory, hold memory and hold these ideas. And that's very interesting to me.
Yeah, me too. And that again harkens back to what I was saying about and I'm looking at Nabokov, who's right next to you on the shelf. Yeah, transparent things. You know, this idea that all that really changes is time. The space is the same. You come, yeah.
But that's pretty wild, right?
Yeah. Yes, it makes you think of the multiverse and frothy universes and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Are we in the frothy universe right now?
Well, yeah, that's the thing, is what you're presenting is almost an alternative history in a way, but the people who have criticized the book criticize it like, oh, well, she's behind the times. This has already happened. And that wasn't your point. That wasn't your point at all, at least in my mind.
No, of course not.
Yeah. And people need to understand that the reason why it's an unfolding is that's what I was saying. These are real people.
Yeah.
Are they the real people that have led us to a situation where I think the times made the man, times made Trump. Trump didn't make the
Absolutely. Man. Totally. 1000%. Yes. And I would say, you know, is there a bow? Yes, there is a bow. Is there a big guy? Absolutely. I mean, these are all characters whose personalities and names are filling in for people who exist in multiple ways. I mean, you know, they make mention of the brothers being the Koch brothers and so on, but these are all people who in one way, shape or form are active doing this work. And people like Metzger, he's one of my favorites, you know, this retired ad man who's talking a lot about the way things are sold, the way ideas are sold to us, and, you know, the algorithms. And I think the average person, and even the highly sophisticated person, doesn't realize the way in which on a daily basis algorithms are selling us to ourselves.
Right.
Which reduces our view smaller and smaller.
Yeah, you put it well last night when you were talking about different person looks at Google News, they're going to get something different. Oh, and what's the book you refer to, or I guess Metzger refers to? It's a great book about the concept of what's the name of the book?
I don't remember, but I know what you're talking about. Yes, but that's all real. I mean, that's all 100% real. Yeah. To me, I just love Metzger. I love this guy, you know, out at the edge of Chicago, who knows way too much about how everything works. And he has a full whack job.
Yeah.
It's like Dr. Strangelove, you know, it's just like.
Yeah, you expect his arm to go up. But then again, you know, you go to Kissick, and I'm not saying he's in there for comic relief, because there are people like them.
Yes.
He's got all these daughters he's got to take care of. He's in their thrall. They control him completely. He adds up his pennies and his dimes and extrapolates them out. And at first you're just laughing at him, and then you realize, yeah, he's one of your people.
Yeah, of course. Yes.
So I guess
somebody has to count the money.
Right. That's what he's there for.
Yes, absolutely.
So that brings me to, I guess, the crucial question about the book, which is, and I ask this every day to people, what do you think is going to happen?
Wow, I don't know what's going to happen, and that makes me really uncomfortable, because I am always somebody who's looking down the long road, and I like to think I have a good read on things. And I think there is an enormous amount up for grabs. And I would say, if we live in a world where suddenly there are no rules, there are no expectations that we didn't think we had to legislate, but, you know, if you can walk out of the White House and take the yellow top secret folders with you, and, you know, I don't know what, Xerox the contents and do what you want with it, make little collages at home, that's a problem. And if you can try to disrupt free and fair voting, that's a problem. And on the one hand, these things are not new in any way. And they didn't happen for the first time with Donald Trump. But Donald Trump has had the unique ability to kind of navigate through these so that nothing actually sticks to the man. And then the question becomes, where and when does this stop? So I think it's really hard to know where we're going to go. And I think that we are actually in a time that is pivotal and scary. And I don't know if there's a way to reel it back in. And I also think that as all of this has happened, in the real world, not in the world of the book, things have become so much more fractured and people are protective of their own, and there is an increased sense of sort of tribalism and divide. And you'd say, in theory, that is something that our government had manuals. There's a 1961 CIA manual that talks about how to create disruption, chaos, and it's really about making fissures that allow for overthrow of governments. I don't think it was ever planned to be used here, but that kind of disruption sows a sense of fear and discontent across populations. And so that is worrisome. It is worrisome that we have such an incredible divide about race, about sexism, the clawing back of women's rights. I don't know why my phone is. Moment, please. I'm just gonna throw my phone away now.
Well, if you have to do something, you can do it, and I can edit this out.
Right, hold on 1 second.
Okay, we're at 48. Okay.
Okay, I'm back.
Okay. I think you were. I think I can cut that exactly where it was.
Let me try to actually I'm going to put this in the other room. Hold on.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
We're back.
Okay. I think I can cut that exactly at a point, and then I'll ask a question now that follows. Okay. Let's see. Okay. How can I do this? All right.
Yes, I believe in God.
Now I gotta cut that too. All right. Okay. So, for example, Thoreau said, as you know, most men live lives of quiet desperation. And you're talking about the Teflon aspect of Trump. When he said at the very beginning, and no one listened to him, and Seth Meyers started his run to be president, he said, I could shoot someone broad daylight on Fifth Avenue, and I would, and he was 100% right. This is not a man who leads a life of quiet desperation. Which would you rather have?
What were the choices again? What's A?
A man of quiet desperation whose life is meek and mild, unlike that Teddy Roosevelt would live, or someone who pushes his way, like Steve Jobs, makes a dent in the universe, which he certainly has.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a really good question. So I would say it seems to me, and I saw this, I mean, it's interesting because Nixon was super interesting to me in the way that Nixon was a very, and not that I think about, like a very unlikable, bitter man who really didn't have a lot of friends and was very interior and a sort of perseverator and didn't have the charisma that most of our candidates have, right? And then when I see people like Bill Clinton, pictured right there, Bill Clinton exuded a kind of charisma and so on. And we think, okay, so what comes with that? Well, in a way, what comes with that is I always make these jokes that, presidents, male presidents seem to either have affairs or start wars. And I think there is a kind of personality involved in wanting that kind of power, wanting that kind of role that is both charismatic, but also needy in certain ways. So, what I want actually, I would say in the White House is a grown-up and somebody who maybe they don't have to be perfect. I love flawed people, but I can't have somebody who has no understanding of history whatsoever, does not even understand the references of what might be told to him in a given day, and has to be spoken to through like picture book references because he can't look at anything or read anything. So I think there's so much about Donald Trump that is profoundly disturbing. And yet I understand why many Americans in some ways saw themselves in him, and they looked to him and they saw hope for themselves because they felt that Donald Trump heard them and represented them. I would say that Donald Trump used those Americans to meet his own ends. And took their money. And by the way, they don't have any money. And he took every penny they would give him.
Yeah, I think, you kind of talked about that in a way. The thing about Trump is, someone told me the other day, you really ought not to question someone's core beliefs. You can question their actions or their speech, but they're entitled to their core beliefs. And I realize that's something just knee jerk do with Republicans. And I
My core beliefs.
yeah, I do. And that's not fair, I don't think.
Well, it's interesting because I would say with someone like Donald Trump, I don't think he in any way is an average Republican. I don't think he even knows what his core beliefs are. There is one belief, and it is Donald Trump. It is more for me, and I don't really care about anybody else.
Sure, of any narcissist, he could easily be a Democrat. It wouldn't make any difference to him. He was a Democrat.
Yes. I don't want to go there.
Well, and Hillary, and Bill went to his.
I know. I've seen the photos.
Well,
Yeah.
so if you go, so okay, what I had asked you before is what you think will happen. But I guess what people have to question, like I said, when you close the cover of the book, you're going to go away saying, I wonder, normally you would go away and say, I wonder what will happen. But it is happening. That's what's so cool about the book. You don't usually have a book like that because the book is here. The book is
here.
Yeah, here and here.
Yes, exactly. I mean, I think what's also interesting is, in the book, the big guy really is enamored with Dick Cheney, and the big guy also somehow thinks, his moment of consciousness is like, oh, hey, I don't have a son as a successor, but it turns out I have this great daughter, and maybe she will follow in my footsteps. But it's still his own obliviousness and naivete that he's still self-involved in seeing himself as, the guidepost for this. But then I look at Liz Cheney and I think, wow, I didn't see that coming, right? I didn't see Liz Cheney about to step up for truth and rule of law and all that. So that's really interesting. And when I look at the end of this book, I look at Meghan and I think, well, I'm not sure she's like Liz Cheney in that sense, but I do think that Meghan is about to step off and to sort of build her own world. And that's where I would say the optimism is what is the world that our young people will build? And the only trick now is getting safely to whatever that point is, because we're not really at those young people yet. They still have a little ways to go.
No, we're at 82-year-olds, whether it's
exactly
Dianne Feinstein or Nancy Pelosi or our president or Trump or anybody.
All of them. Or Mitch McConnell or Chuck Grassley. I mean, they're just, we're right. We got an old world.
It's like the Soviet Union in the 50s with those guys in gray suits,
Yes.
It was
totally.
laughable at that time.
But it's also, and the guys in the book talk about this because they of course are in love with sort of the old Republican Party, those people. But then when you look at the new people, they call them like the Yahoos or the religious right. You've got like a Marjorie Taylor Greene or these other people. It's like, bring your rifle to work day. I mean, it's just, I mean, as you would say, you can't make it up, and it's scary.
That is a scary thing. It's may you live in interesting times. I'm 70 years old. I do not want to live in interesting times for the rest of my life. And
And what I would say is, as a fiction writer, I depend on the world around me, the terra firma, to stay firma, so that I can actually go off into my imagination and create all kinds of things. But if the terra firma is wiggly, then I have to stay here and pay attention. And for me, the last 10 years have been like, I'm rubbernecking America. I'm like, what? And I can't keep up with it, both in my own fiction, but I also, it's a wipeout. It's like exhausting. And it's really interesting. I'm sure, when I watch the news every night, all night, I always think like, when did Adam Schiff sleep? When did he write that book he just wrote? Did he write that book himself? Because there's so much work that they are doing and that needs to be done. It's nutty. And then I also think, why is Trump still walking around? Why does nothing affect the man? He seems to have, things that would make me anxious. He's not anxious about anything. He's just, and I know it's narcissism and whatever, but I'm surprised he didn't at least choke on a hamburger already.
Or several of them. But the thing about it is that like I listened to this guy talking on the news saying that, oh, if Trump gets indicted, that will change his life. You don't understand what an indictment does for a person and his family. And I go, you idiot. He doesn't care if he gets indicted. It's not going to change his life in the slightest. He enjoys that.
Trump lives his life, and this is way before government, and people who have been in business with him told me this. He lives his life through lawsuits. I mean, he litigates everything. He fights everything. That is the way he moves through the world. I mean, I think it's, one of the things too that disturbs me is I'm like, who is paying those legal bills? And obviously he's having trouble getting lawyers, which is a good thing. But, that same Joe who voted for him is still sending, that Joe who has no money to spare is giving it to Donald Trump to pay for bad legal advice. Not that there's good legal advice for Donald Trump, because there isn't any. It's just go away,
And it's funny what happens, we're supposed to be talking about your book. We both go off on a rant. That's what Democrats do. They just go off on rants.
Right. And that's also what worries me, because I would say the Republicans are armed and the Democrats are just talking. It's like,
it's in your book and it was in your talk last night. Well, one of the things we can talk about as we get towards the end of this is, you talk about likability, and all, the most, I think the reviews I've read, all of them say the same thing. They talk about him in the basement with the Jell-O. So want to run that, everyone else runs it by. So run that by, because that's the one thing that's like appalling, just the Jell-O.
Well, so we're talking about a scene in which the big guy is playing war. And because he's the big guy, he has not just a ping pong table that he can use, he has a pool table. And on every table in his large basement, there's a different war and a different scene being played out. But on this particular Thanksgiving, he is reenacting a scene in Vietnam. And he is using orange Jell-O as Agent Orange to defoliate fake trees. And it turns into a sticky mess. Yeah, that one, when I thought of that one, I was like, wow, I like that. It's so demented. And it did remind me of, kids growing up. I would see various people's older brothers having rigged up little hoses to do things and create things on their war tables and railroads, but also this notion of men playing war, which then echoes further into the book when there's this hunt club weekend and they sort of play war with a group of private military contractors. And I'd like to say, I wish I could make that up, but there are in this country right now groups of private military contractors playing war and practicing war.
It's funny when you said demented, because that's where most of your books go. And then someone will review it and they'll say something like, the demented part overwhelms her genius as a writer. And I'm going, well, not really. It's like Alice, holy mackerel, when I read it, that's when I started, that's when I started with you, is I read Alice and I go, I can't believe she was strong enough to write the book. What's going to happen to her because she wrote that.
I know. I mean, I look at it and you can see back in that corner right there, that's John Waters. Let's see. So there's John, who's a friend. And I think of this book, I describe it as if Joan Didion and John Waters had a baby, it would be this book. I think I have written some things that are both, I would say, very difficult to write. End of Alice is very, very difficult. But I'm always asking moral and cultural questions, So in the End of Alice, there's the pedophile in jail. And he says, well, if I'm in jail, why is this still happening? Why, and that was really my question about why do we as a society deal with the abuse of children so badly? And in this thing, I am asking, where are we going next? And by the way, is everyone watching? Has everyone got their eyes open? And are they thinking about what they want and how they view America and how we can somehow come to some consensus about who and what America is in the future and what our feelings are about democracy? Democracy isn't just one man's democracy. It's a much broader thing.
Yeah. And this is relatively mild for you. It's like, Lionel Shriver, who I've interviewed many times, we need to talk about Kevin. It's like, oh my God, it's the same. That's the same as what you do. You can't talk about this and you're talking about it. It's like, someone, I don't know if someone blurbed it. You got Gary Steingart blurbing you, which is great. I interviewed him too. He got mad at me for something.
Did he?
Yeah, I said something and he got mad at me. But someone either reviewed one of your books or somebody else's book, and they said if Oprah went,
John Waters said that.
Right. If Oprah went insane, this would be her favorite book.
Yes, exactly.
That was John Waters.
Yeah.
He's
perfect. A really big reader. He's a wonderful, wonderful reader, and he's so funny.
I know he really is, and I mean, I followed him like I followed you for since Divine and since Yeah.
And he's got his first novel out and it's right up there. It's that Liar Mouth. Exactly.
Oh, I got to write that down.
Yes, you should get him on. You should get him on because he's so great to talk to.
It's hard to get people on after the book comes out. The world has changed for you. You used to go
Right.
out to the bookstore and you get 100 people like last night. Now you get the entire world. That's why no one would ever talk to me before. Now you're talking to little me.
I think John would happily talk to little you.
Oh, I would love to talk to him. I'll try. You can put in a good word for me
Yes.
when you send me your chapbook.
Yes. Where am I sending that?
You can send it to the bookstore.
Okay.
Yeah, you can just go Wellington Square Bookshop.
Okay.
That would be great. That's so
Yes.
nice of you. In conclusion, I would say, are you going to do a sequel? But the sequel's already been written every day, isn't it?
Not really, because it's interesting. I think that there's a space between obviously where this book ends, where we are now, so 2022, and like the next 4 years. But I feel like there is something in the offing, and I don't know if I'm going to do it or not. I have some notes. I'm not sure is really the answer, and I'm not sure how. I don't know, and it's funny to say too. Like I wouldn't want to do it and have it not be good. Do you know what I mean? But I may have to write even just a little bit more about Meghan.
Yeah, but the problem is this next one will have to be a lot more demented, I think.
I have ideas.
Which is scary. Yeah, but well, that's okay. I always say the last question and it's not. But okay, this is the last one. So the book is really cinematic.
Mm-hmm.
Which leads me to the question of, does someone else think it's cinematic?
I hope someone else will think it's cinematic, because the money that comes from other people's dreams of cinema has certainly, helped me put my kid through school and stuff. I don't know. I could totally see it as film or television. And I definitely would say my brain is a very visual brain, but so far it is available if anyone would like it.
All right, we'll keep that in mind. If I run across any producers who want to option it, I will send them your way.
Please do. I would like that.
Well, thanks so much for being here. It's been wonderful. And I think I interviewed you, it might have been 10 years ago for Awe or something. I don't know what was the last one? It's 2012, right?
No, 2018 was Days of Awe. And then before that was May We Be Forgiven, which was, I think, 2012. So it could be, yeah.
Yeah, maybe I interviewed you for May We Be Forgiven. I think so.
You remember for the Nixon Scholar? Yes.
Remember that book Tampa by Lauren Groff? Do you remember that book?
Yes, of course.
I thought I got you mad because I compared some of your stuff to that book Florida, because not Florida.
No, that was later, because that was 2018 was Florida, I think. Right.
I was thinking of the one where the woman at the school that seduced the young boy, that may have messed up her career, I think.
Her career is fine. She's got a great career.
She lives in my hometown in Gainesville, Florida.
In Gainesville? Yeah. I have friends who live there.
Yeah, I went to the University of Florida and law school there.
Alligators.
Alligator. Yeah. There's alligators that were right in my backyard.
Yes, exactly.
Had to keep my dogs away.
Totally. Yard gators. Exactly. That's why you can't have small dogs there.
Exactly. Yeah.
There's a dog weight minimum in Gainesville.
Yes. At least all mine were Labradors. They all weighed over 100 pounds. So
exactly.
Still do too.
Yes, they're there to protect you and you're there to protect them, and it works out.
Yeah, I was waiting for him to bark, but he didn't. So, okay. Are we done?
We are, but thank you so much. I've got to hop to the next thing that starts at 2:15.
Oh, you're right there. Okay. Well, thanks again.
Thank you, really. It's a treat. And I will send you some stuff.
Okay, that's great.
I love sending stuff. Okay, perfect.
Likewise.
All right. You bet. Bye.